Welcome back to the Men in Transition YouTube channel. So today we have a question about, and I'll throw that question out. But first of all, I am with my two co-founders, Marty Herman to my right, Darnell Johnson to my left. And with the question that I'm going to ask each of these gentlemen, and you guys are gentlemen, right?
That's correct. Yes,
good,
sir.
Good. Right. Good. That's a good thing. So the question that I'm going to ask him is, why do we need organizations like Men in Transition? So why do we need an organization like Men in Transition in the first place? And I'll start off with Marty.
Well, through our years in prison ministry, we know we've built these relationships one-on-one with inmates, and it's been a great thing. And it came more and more to our realization that these guys, we have this great network within the prison, right?
Right.
We have this great thing going, but what happens when they leave the prison, when they're discharged and they're let go with, a little bit of money in their hands and no place to go?
Which happens a lot too, right? Yeah.
Right. And even more so, even on the outside, coming into, encountering other people that were recently in the prison system, kind of reiterating the fact that there's very little support on the outside, for guys that are leaving the prison. And the fact that the lack of support and combination of that and former inmates going back into situations where they shouldn't with their families, and such.
Yeah, because a lot of them come from dysfunctional families, right? So that's a big part of it.
Or go back to their crew or whatever, right? And then they get into trouble. So
then they get into trouble,
right? Mm-hmm. So what's needed is a real, one-on-one relationship built, and the mentoring that comes with that. Currently, recidivism rate at 3 years is about 50%, and 5 years it's close to 70%. And really, overall, that's really unacceptable. So,
I call it the revolving door.
Right. So organizations like Men in Transition are very necessary to fill that gap where there is no support system, right? And to be able to lift these guys up and get them going and mentor them and keep them on the right track. So I would say that would be what I feel at this time is what is necessary.
All right. They're very good. Thank you, Marty. And I'm going to pose that same question to Mr. Darnell Johnson. Tell us why we need more organizations like Men in Transition.
Men in Transition Fresh Start is an incredible organization. We need more organizations like Men in Transition because, as Marty has mentioned in the previous, that the recidivism rate is 70%. 5 years, people are going back into prison. I remember working with the Kairos ministry, working inside the prison. Most of the inmates were afraid to even leave prison. And they were afraid because they were thinking about some of the things that would get them back into the prison, such as drugs, alcohol, some of the things, the distractions. And I think it's a huge thing to have an organization that provide life skills, be able to help provide job opportunities for post-incarcerated men. It will reduce the recidivism rate, and it's a huge opportunity for anyone to be involved. And I think that is very important that everyone really look into organizations like Men in Transition, Fresh Start, because we together can make a change.
Right. And there's not a lot of organizations in California, nonprofit, that support the post-incarcerated, right?
Absolutely.
So we being one of several organizations in California that actually do support post-incarcerated men. Right?
Absolutely.
And we're not the only one, by the way, but there's others. But unfortunately, there's too few of them.
Absolutely. And also, you just want to make sure that you're post-incarcerated, we want to make sure that they're not going to drugs, alcohol,
That's
gangs.
the biggest thing.
Or even things that would inspire them to go back into prison. So we can reduce that rate. We're doing our part as a job. And that's that's our founding mission as far as our position.
And I'm kind of curious what you think. Well, what's the main reason why most of these men actually do go back into prison?
I think it's when we really follow the root cause analysis. I mean, I've personally had my father. He was incarcerated for a long time, and I had a lot of people that I knew that was incarcerated, and people go back into the same cycle. You get released after doing a 10-year, 15-year, even 5 years, and you go back into the same community, and you start doing the same thing.
Huge, right?
Same patterns, right?
Oh yeah, same patterns, exactly,
patterns,
Marty.
yeah.
So providing relationship, like Marty mentioned earlier, and what Dan was talking about as well, is very important that we provide with this organization. As far as like I just mentioned, that my father was incarcerated. There's a lot of fathers that's incarcerated, which affects the family and the household. So what we're going to do is we're going to provide a lot of opportunity to provide knowledge, skills, and abilities for post-incarcerated men. And that's the basis of Men in Transition.
Right. Well, Mark, let me throw this at you. So you're just recently, you've been incarcerated, let's say 7 years, and now you come out, and since you're on the street. So, I mean, what happens? You're out of prison. Right. You're, let's say you go back into a very dysfunctional home. Based on things you've seen in prison ministry, well, what happens particularly to the men? That go back in these environments?
Well, they go back into that same environment, right? The same they're around the same bad vices again that they were around before, and they fall into a pattern of recurring behavior that they had taken up before, and I really don't blame them, because when you go back in and you have all these external influences working on you, right? And you don't have the support, you don't have a mentor, right? You don't have someone to come along and take your hand and pick you up and lift you along, right? But you got, like I said, your old crew, right?
To go back to the crew,
back to the crew, right? And doing things you're not supposed to do, and one thing leads to another, and then you're back,
So environment's a huge thing when you're when you're out of prison, and you need to. So I'm gonna throw this question at you, Darnell. So you're a person, and we're talking about people who really wanted to, because probably was not understood in prison.
Right.
Not everybody wants to go back to gang activity or criminal activity.
Right.
There's truly a big segment of the prison population who wants to do the right thing once they get out, and they don't want to go back.
Absolutely.
But let's say we go, I'm out of prison now, and I go back home, and even if I have a decent home environment that I'm going back to, now I got I'm a felon. I want to work, right? But now I'm having a hard time getting work because I'm a felon. And so walk me through that. What's that like, in your opinion, based on what you've seen in the prison ministry? Is someone getting out and now they're trying to find work and they can't get that?
That's a great question, Dan. There's actually a story about a guy that was released from prison. He was given $200, just like I mentioned earlier. He ended up going to downtown LA. He had a drug addiction problem prior, and within 3 days he was back into prison off of a robbery. You're a felon. You want to find a job. You want to provide for your family. You want to do all the necessary things that it takes to be that man, that leader, but you
to be that
don't
man and that leader.
Absolutely. Right. But you just have a family, you have a household that you grew up. I mean, there's so many different variables to this equation, right? You can grow up without a mom and a mom and a dad. You can not have a support system. You have to make the decisions based upon your own instinct. I know I had to growing up.
Right.
So imagine that you have no support system. You're released from prison. You're given a certain amount of money, and you don't know how to go on an interview. You don't know the resources that's available.
Right.
You don't know that there's housing available. You don't know that there's financial aid that's available. You don't know that there are ways that you can eat and survive, and then you get stuck in going to the same community.
Right.
So these are some of the circumstances that would lead someone to be back into the prison system.
Right.
We need to rehabilitate some of the some of the post-incarcerated men, and give them options and resources to be able to allow them to succeed and to push forward for potential growth.
Right. I totally agree with that, Darnell. And you brought up a couple things too. Substance abuse, and one of the things that Marty touched on is going back into dysfunctional environment. So I'm going to throw that question over to Marty, because I know Marty works a lot too with young people who are in recovery. So Marty, kind of help me understand the inmates, a former incarcerated person who battles substance abuse and now he's out of prison. What's that like in your experience, what they have to go through?
Right. Well, I feel like they leave prison and, the prison system itself doesn't prepare them, right, for when they get out. And
I think that's huge. That's huge.
Right.
Yeah.
There are programs within the prison that really help, but I don't think that's really preparing for when they're out on their own, right?
Right.
Especially if they lack the resources, the family contacts to help them get through.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then of course we know environment plays a big thing. They come right back to their, they're going to tend to drift back to those friends, right? That are most likely in substance abuse themselves, right? So
even if they were able to avoid substance abuse in the prison, what happens when they go back into that environment where their friends are right? Then what happens?
Yeah. Well, they're not going to get the support and a way through it, to keep in recovery, right? To keep out of it. What they're going to do is most likely they're going to fall right back into the patterns of old behaviors, right? And start taking up the substances again, right? So an organization like Men in Transition, comes along, and through our life skills curriculum, through our mentoring and teaching of leadership and such, right?
Absolutely.
We're going to help them along in their recovery, right? As well as helping them to get employment and housing and, everything else, whatever education that they need.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's all a very, holistic approach to, former prison incarceration and recovery, because they often go hand, as we know, in prison.
Right.
It often goes hand in hand. So,
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, so I'm going to wrap up what I heard. So there's first of all, there's financial problems when you come out of prison, because obviously you don't have money, and you tend to go back into dysfunctional situations. You don't have a lot of support once you're in those dysfunctional households. You're a convicted felon, so you can't find work. There is no support system. Unfortunately, the rehabilitative part of the prison doesn't rehabilitate, so you don't have basic life skills. You don't have you don't have coping skills. You don't have skills to find employment. So in my mind, that's just a recipe for revolving door to go back to prison. There's no mentorship. There's no training for finding work. A lot of men who come out of prison don't have a place to stay, which was Jordan was getting at. That example of which we hear a lot about in prison. They get their $200, they get out, they're out on the weekend, and by the next week they're back in the prison because they have nowhere to go. They hook up with the wrong person and boom, right back to prison. That's not everybody's story, but it is fairly common. So there's a lot of factors of why people go to prison or go back to prison, why the recidivism rate is what it is. And it's not easy, but the bottom line is there needs to be a support system for these guys, right? And there needs to be training, and they need a community that will support them so they never come back. So this is what this is the things we deal with all the time. The question, if you have a question, please send it to our email. It'll be below. You can see the email. If you like what you hear, please subscribe. I got two great gentlemen to the side of me, both experienced in prison ministry, and that's why we're the co-founders of Men in Transition, because we want to make a difference in these men's lives so they never come back to prison. And guys, what do we want people to do below?
We want to link down.
Subscribe
there's
below.
There's a subscribe below. So if you like what you're hearing, there'll be a lot more. We'll have We'll have interviews. We'll have interviews from inmates themselves. So you'll get the real deal on what's going on. So this is what we want to present to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you for subscribing. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again.
What's our website?
And our website, MIT. Thank you, MIT. FreshStart.org.